The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Rose Coleman clutched the telegram in trembling hands, the words blurring through her tears as she stood on the dusty main street of Bismarck, Dakota Territory, in the summer of 1879. She had traveled over 2,000 miles from Boston, only to learn that her brother, her last living relative, had been dead for 3 weeks. Rose wandered aimlessly until nightfall, finding herself at the edge of town where a small campfire burned. A lone figure sat beside it, a man whose face was hidden beneath the wide brim of a cowboy hat. She should have turned back, should have feared being alone with a stranger in the wilderness, but exhaustion and grief had hollowed her out. "Madam," the man's voice was deep, rough with disuse. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Rose lifted her gaze to meet his. "I have nowhere else to go." The cowboy studied her for a long moment before gesturing to the space across from him. "Fire's warm. Coffee's hot." She settled onto a fallen log, the weight of her dark green traveling dress suddenly unbearable in the prairie heat. The flames danced before her, hypnotic and soothing, drawing her into their golden red depths. "Name's Lucas Nordstrom," he said, pouring coffee into a tin cup and passing it to her. "Most folks call me Luke." "Rose Coleman." She accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. "Thank you." The woman stared at the fire's glow, and the cowboy saw his own memories in her eyes, the same haunted look he'd carried for years. The same grief, the same loss. "You look like someone who just got bad news," he said. Rose nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "My brother Thomas. He bought land here. Wrote to me about his plans to build a life." Her voice caught. "I arrived today to find he died of fever 3 weeks ago." Lucas removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and a face weathered by the elements, but still youthful. "He couldn't have been more than 30. I'm sorry, Miss Coleman. The land office says his claim will revert back soon if no one works it." She laughed bitterly. "I came out here to start anew, and now I have nothing." Lucas poked at the fire with a stick. "What were you planning to do in Bismarck?" "I was a schoolteacher in Boston. I thought perhaps I could teach here while helping Thomas." She stared into her coffee. "Foolish dreams. Bismarck could use a schoolteacher," Lucas said quietly. "Town's growing fast since the railroad came through." Hope flickered briefly in Rose's chest. "Perhaps, but I need somewhere to live first." Lucas was silent for a long moment, turning his hat in his hands. "Your brother's claim, where was it?" "North of town. A creek runs through it," the agent said. Lucas looked up sharply. "Coleman Creek. I know the place. Good water, decent grazing." Rose set down her cup. "You've seen it." "My ranch borders it to the west." He hesitated. "Miss Coleman, I don't mean to be forward, but that land. If you're interested in keeping it, I could help you work it. At least until you decide what you want to do." Rose studied him, this stranger offering aid. "Why would you do that?" "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," he said simply. "And because that land has the best water access for miles. Truthfully, I've had my eye on it for my cattle." "So you would help me to help yourself," she said, a small smile touching her lips. Lucas laughed, the sound surprising them both. "I suppose that's honest enough. But a lady like you, alone out here, it won't be easy." "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Nordstrom." "Luke," he corrected. "And I don't doubt it, Miss Coleman. But Dakota Territory doesn't care much about strength when winter comes." The night deepened around them as they talked. Rose learned that Lucas had come west after the war, that he'd built his ranch from nothing over 7 years of back-breaking labor. He didn't tell her why he'd left wherever he came from, and she didn't ask. "I can take you to your brother's claim tomorrow," he offered as the fire burned low. "You should see what you're deciding about." Rose nodded, suddenly overwhelmed with fatigue. "I would appreciate that." Lucas stood, stretched. "You can have my bedroll tonight. I'll keep watch." "I couldn't possibly." "You could and you will," he said firmly. "Morning comes early out here." Rose didn't argue further. As she settled beneath the rough wool blanket, she watched Lucas through half-closed eyes. He sat with his back against a tree, rifle across his knees, his face illuminated by the dying embers. There was something reassuring about his presence, something solid and dependable that made her feel safer than she had in years. Dawn came with birdsong and the scent of coffee. Rose woke to find Lucas already saddled and ready. A second horse, a gentle-looking mare, tethered nearby. "Borrowed her from my ranch hand," he explained, helping Rose mount. Figured your city clothes weren't made for long walks. Rose arranged her skirts as best she could, grateful for the split-riding skirt she'd had the foresight to wear for travel. I'm afraid I'm not much of a horsewoman. She'll treat you gentle, Lucas promised. It's about an hour's ride. They traveled in companionable silence, the landscape opening before them, rolling prairie interspersed with stands of cottonwood trees, the distant smudge of the Missouri River to the east. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that made Rose's heart ache with unexpected longing. There, Lucas said finally, pointing ahead to where a creek cut through the land, a half-built cabin standing near its banks. That was your brother's place. Rose's throat tightened as they approached. The cabin walls were up, the roof partially completed. A garden plot had been marked out, but never planted. Evidence of Thomas's dreams, cut short. Lucas helped her dismount, steadying her when her legs threatened to give way. Take your time, he said gently. Rose walked slowly around the cabin, touching the rough-hewn logs, imagining Thomas's hands placing each one. Inside, she found his few belongings: clothes, tools, a Bible with their parents' names inscribed inside. She clutched it to her chest, tears flowing freely now. When she emerged, Lucas was examining the roof. It's solid work, he said. Another week would have seen it finished. Can it be completed? She asked, wiping her eyes. Lucas nodded. With help, yes. You're thinking of staying then? I have nowhere else to go. She repeated her words from the previous night. And this is all I have left of him. Lucas studied her, his expression unreadable. It won't be easy. Few worthwhile things are, Mr. Nordstrom. She straightened her shoulders. If you're still offering your assistance, I accept. I can pay you once I secure a teaching position. Luke, he reminded her with a slight smile. And we can work out the details later. For now, let's get you back to town for your things. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Rose took a room at the boarding house in Bismarck while Lucas and 2 of his ranch hands worked to finish the cabin. She met with the town council about teaching and was offered the position immediately, the previous teacher having left to get married. Each evening, Rose rode out to the homestead to check progress and bring supplies. She learned to cook over an open fire, to identify edible plants, to handle the gentle mare Lucas had lent her. And each evening, she found herself lingering longer, talking with Lucas as the sun set. She learned that he had been born in Minnesota, the son of Swedish immigrants, that he had fought for the Union in the war, though he never spoke of the battles, that he loved poetry and could recite Whitman from memory, a fact that surprised and delighted her. My mother insisted I be educated, he explained one evening as they sat on the cabin's newly completed porch. Said just because we lived on the frontier didn't mean I should have a frontier mind. She sounds like a wise woman. Lucas's expression softened. She died of tuberculosis when I was 17. Father followed 2 years later. I'm sorry. Rose hesitated. My parents died in a fire when I was 20. Thomas was all I had left. Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. It leaves a hollow place, doesn't it? One that nothing seems to fill. Yes, Rose whispered. Exactly that. The cabin was finished by mid-August, just in time for Rose to prepare for the start of school in September. Lucas helped her move her few belongings from town, and his ranch hands' wives brought housewares as welcoming gifts: quilts, cooking pots, preserved foods to see her through until her garden could produce. I can't accept all this, Rose protested as Lucas unloaded the last of the supplies. You can and you will, he said, echoing his words from their first night. Folks take care of each other out here. You'll do the same for someone else someday. On the day before school was to start, Rose stood in her cabin, her home, and marveled at the transformation. Lucas had built her bookshelves, a sturdy table, chairs. The women had brought curtains for the windows. It was small but comfortable, and undeniably hers. It's perfect, she told Lucas when he came to check on her. I can never repay you. He shook his head, seeing it lived in his payment enough. He hesitated. I'll still come by to help with the heavier work. Chopping wood, repairs. If that's all right. Of course, she said, perhaps too quickly. I'd like that. The weeks turned to months, and Rose settled into life in Dakota Territory. Her students, 23 in all, ranging from 6 to 16, challenged and delighted her. The townspeople welcomed her, inviting her to socials and church gatherings. And Lucas came by, true to his word. Sometimes with practical reasons to fix the pump, to bring firewood, but increasingly just to talk. He would arrive after his day's work, often with a book to share or a story from his ranch. They would sit by the fire, and Rose would find herself watching the way the flames illuminated his face, the quiet strength in his hands as he turned pages. Winter arrived with brutal force in late November. Snow piled in drifts higher than Rose's windows, and temperatures plummeted below zero. School closed for 2 weeks during the worst of it. Rose was grateful for Lucas's foresight in stocking extra wood and supplies. It was during this bitter cold spell that Lucas arrived unexpectedly one evening, his horse laboring through snow up to its chest. "You shouldn't have come in this weather," Rose scolded, hurrying him inside. "It's dangerous. Needed to check on you," he said, stamping snow from his boots. His face was red with cold, his beard frosted. "Storm's worse than expected." "Well, you can't go back tonight," Rose decided, taking his coat. "You'll stay here." Something flickered in Lucas's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps. That wouldn't be proper, Rose. It was the first time he'd used her given name. She liked the way it sounded in his deep voice. "Propriety won't matter if you freeze to death, Lucas Nordstrom. You'll take the bed, and I'll sleep by the fire." Lucas laughed. "If you think I'm taking your bed, you don't know me at all." They compromised. Rose kept her bed, while Lucas made a pallet near the stove. They ate a simple dinner of bean soup and cornbread, then sat together listening to the wind howl outside. "Read to me," Rose asked, handing him a volume of Tennyson. Lucas accepted the book, their fingers brushing. He opened to a marked page and began to read Ulysses in his resonant voice. Rose watched his lips form the words, mesmerized by the passion he brought to the poetry. When he finished, he looked up to find her watching him intently. "What is it?" he asked. "I was just thinking how surprising you are," she admitted. "A cowboy who loves poetry. A rancher who helps a stranger claim land that he wanted." Lucas closed the book. "Not so surprising. Just a man who recognizes something worth protecting when he sees it." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Rose looked away first, suddenly shy. "It's late. We should sleep." Lucas nodded, setting the book aside. "Good night, Rose." "Good night, Lucas." She lay awake long after his breathing deepened into sleep, listening to the storm and wondering at the warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. The storm raged for 3 days. They remained snowbound together, and in that time, Rose learned more about Lucas than in all the months before. He told her about his time in the war, about the nightmares that still woke him sweating and shaking, about his dreams for his ranch, the legacy he hoped to build. In turn, she shared her own past, her strict upbringing in Boston, her rebellion in becoming a teacher rather than marrying the banker her parents had chosen, her grief when they died, and the lonely years that followed. On the third night, as they sat side by side on the floor before the fire, Lucas turned to her. "Can I tell you something, Rose?" "Anything," she said, meaning it completely. "When I first saw you by my campfire that night, I thought you were a vision." His voice was low, hesitant. "You looked so lost, so alone, like a reflection of myself." The woman stared at the fire's glow, and the cowboy saw his own memories in her eyes. "I felt the same," she whispered, "as if you understood without words." "I never expected to feel this way again," Lucas continued, his hand finding hers in the firelight. "After the war, I thought that part of me was dead." Rose's heart thundered in her chest. "What part?" "The part that hopes, that dreams of more than just survival." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You brought that back, Rose Coleman." She looked up at him, at the vulnerability in his weathered face. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative. Then Lucas's hand came up to cradle her face, and it deepened into something urgent and necessary. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. "I shouldn't have," Rose began, but Lucas shook his head. "Don't apologize for something I've wanted since the moment you first looked at me across that fire." They talked until dawn, making plans and sharing dreams. When the storm finally broke later that day, Lucas returned to his ranch with a promise to return on Sunday. News traveled fast in small communities. By Christmas, all of Bismarck knew that the new schoolteacher and the rancher were courting. There were raised eyebrows from some of the more conservative townswomen, but most people seemed genuinely happy for them. "You've softened him," Lucas's foreman told Rose at the Christmas social. "Never seen the boss smile so much." Rose blushed, watching as Lucas chatted with the town's mayor across the room. "He's a good man." "The best," the foreman agreed. "Deserves some happiness after all he's been through." Lucas proposed on New Year's Eve, as they stood on Rose's porch watching the stars. "It won't be easy," he warned, echoing his words from months before. "Ranching is hard work, and the territory is still wild." Rose took his face in her hands. "Few worthwhile things are easy, Lucas Nordstrom. And you are very worthwhile indeed." They married in April 1880, when the prairie was carpeted with wildflowers. The entire town turned out for the celebration, held on the land between Lucas's ranch and Rose's homestead land that would now be joined, like their lives. Rose continued teaching, riding to town each day on her mare, now her own, a wedding gift from Lucas. In the afternoons, she worked alongside her husband, learning the business of cattle ranching. At night, they read poetry by the fire, planning their future in whispered conversations. Their first challenge came that summer, when a drought threatened the creek that was so vital to both properties. Lucas worked day and night to dig irrigation channels, to ensure the water reached both their cattle and Rose's garden. "We'll make it," he assured her as they collapsed into bed, exhausted. "We've faced worse." Rose curled against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Together, we can face anything." The drought broke in late August, but it was followed by an early frost that damaged much of their hay crop. They would need to buy feed to get the cattle through winter money they had been saving to expand the ranch house before the baby came. "Baby," Lucas had repeated when Rose told him, his expression shifting from worry to wonder in an instant. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be," she'd said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "Come spring, there will be 3 of us." Lucas had lifted her into his arms then, spinning her around until they were both laughing and dizzy. "To hell with the hay," he'd declared. "We'll manage." And they did manage, through that winter and many more to follow. Their son, William, was born in April 1881, a healthy, robust boy with his father's eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Rose continued teaching until a week before his birth and resumed when he was 3 months old, bringing him with her to the schoolhouse. In 1883, the railroad expanded its operations in Bismarck, bringing more settlers and more opportunities. Lucas sold cattle to the railroad camps at premium prices, allowing them to finally build the larger house they had planned. That same year, their daughter Elizabeth was born, followed 2 years later by another son, James. Through it all, the harsh winters, the summer droughts, the challenges of raising children on the frontier, Lucas and Rose remained each other's strength. Each evening, no matter how busy or tired, they would sit together by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes reading, sometimes simply being together in comfortable silence. On their 10th anniversary, Lucas surprised Rose with a trip to San Francisco, a journey made possible by the very railroad that had helped their fortunes grow. They marveled at the city, at the ocean Rose had never seen, at the luxury of hotel rooms and restaurant meals. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked as they stood on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific. "Coming west? Staying in Dakota when you could have returned to Boston?" Rose turned to him, taking in the silver now threading his brown hair, the laugh lines around his eyes, the strong hands that had built their life together. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment." That night in their hotel room, with the sound of the ocean drifting through open windows, Rose watched firelight from the small hearth play across Lucas's face as he dozed beside her. She thought of that first night by his campfire, how lost she had been, how uncertain of her future. The woman stared at the fire's glow, and the cowboy saw his own memories in her eyes. Lucas stirred, opening his eyes to find her watching him. He smiled, reaching for her hand. "What are you thinking about, my love?" "About fires," she said softly, "and how sometimes they destroy, but sometimes they light the way to something better." Lucas nodded, understanding as he always did. "That first night, when you looked into my campfire, I saw something in your eyes that I recognized." "What was it?" "The same loneliness I'd carried for years. The same search for something to fill that hollow place." He brought her hand to his lips. I never imagined that something would be you. Rose leaned down to kiss him, feeling the same spark that had ignited between them all those years ago. We found each other, she whispered against his lips. Two broken pieces that somehow fit perfectly together. Poetry again, Mrs. Nordstrom? He teased, pulling her closer. I learned from the best, Mr. Nordstrom. They returned to their ranch, now one of the largest and most successful in the territory, renewed and more in love than ever. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Their children grew. William followed in his father's footsteps, learning the ranching business from the ground up. Elizabeth showed a talent for medicine and eventually went east to study, the first woman from Bismarck to attend medical school. James discovered a passion for law and politics, eventually helping to draft the Constitution when North Dakota achieved statehood in 1889. Lucas and Rose watched with pride as their children forged their own paths, as the territory they had helped settle transformed into a state, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th with its automobiles and telephones and other marvels. Through it all, they remained constants for each other, partners, lovers, friends. Each evening, no matter what technological wonders arrived to change their lives, they would sit together by the fire, finding in its ancient light the same comfort and connection they had discovered on that first fateful night in 1879. On their 50th anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even two great-grandchildren, Lucas raised a toast to his wife. To Rose, he said, his voice still strong despite his 80 years, who stared into a fire one night and somehow saw worth in a broken old cowboy. Not broken, Rose corrected, her hand finding his as it had countless times over the decades. Just waiting. As was I. Later that night, alone in the ranch house that had been their home for most of their lives, they sat before the fire as they always did. Rose rested her head on Lucas's shoulder, watching the familiar dance of flames. 50 years, Lucas marveled softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you wandered into my camp. And sometimes it feels like I've known you forever, Rose replied, as if my soul recognized yours across that fire. Lucas pressed a kiss to her silver hair. Do you remember what I told you that first night? About feeling hollow inside. I remember everything about that night, she said. It was the beginning of my real life. Mine too. He took her hand, his thumb finding the gold band he'd placed there half a century before. You filled all the empty spaces, Rose. You made me whole again. The woman stared at the fire's glow, and the cowboy saw his own memories in her eyes, not just of the past they had shared, but of the future they had created together. A legacy of love that would continue long after the fire burned to embers, long after they were gone. In that moment, as on countless evenings before, they found in each other the home they had both been seeking when fate brought them together beside a lonely campfire on the Dakota prairie.